Welcome to this explainer, where we dive into the hidden culprit that might be secretly ruining your cannabis harvest. Look, if you've ever poured your heart, soul, and hard-earned money into a grow room only to watch your plants mysteriously struggle, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to expose a silent yield killer, and I promise you, by the time we wrap this up, you're going to look at your daily garden routine in a completely different light.
You know how it is. When plants start looking sick, growers almost instantly blame nutrient deficiencies. It's kind of like a reflex, right? We see a yellowing leaf or a stalled canopy, and we immediately start running through this mental checklist. We think, is it not enough nitrogen? Maybe way too much potassium? Wait, is this a calcium or magnesium deficiency? Our absolute first instinct is to reach for a bottle to fix it, thinking if we just add this one magic nutrient, the plants will completely bounce back.
But what if the biggest threat to your plants isn't a nutrient problem at all? What if, crazy enough, it's actually just water? More specifically, way too much water. It's honestly one of the most common mistakes in cultivation, yet it somehow remains one of the least understood. We spend so much time obsessing over feeding our plants that we completely overlook the basic foundation of how they actually drink and breathe.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, the oxygen deprivation problem. So let's break down the actual mechanism of overwatering, which, as it turns out, really has very little to do with water poisoning. The reason overwatering is so incredibly dangerous isn't because the water itself is harming the plants. It harms the plants because of what that water replaces, and that is oxygen. Too much water literally suffocates your plants. It fills up all those tiny, crucial air spaces in the root zone and aggressively pushes out the vital oxygen. It's simple physics, but the biological consequences, they are absolutely massive.
We kind of need a massive paradigm shift here. Most of us are used to just picturing roots as these biological straws that suck up water and nutrients. But root cells are actual living tissues. Just like the leaves up top need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, your roots down at the bottom absolutely need oxygen for respiration. They physically consume oxygen to generate the energy they require to function. Literally, without oxygen, your roots just cannot do their job.
And this chain reaction shows exactly how chronic saturation just completely shuts down the entire engine of your plant. Look at how this cascades. First, your growing media remains saturated for way too long, meaning those essential air spaces fill entirely with water. Immediately, oxygen levels plummet. Because of that, root respiration slows to a crawl. And then, nutrient uptake completely drops off. The entire plant begins to starve, not because the nutrients aren't sitting right there in the soil, but because the roots are just too suffocated to actually absorb them.
Which brings us to Section 2, decoding the droop. So why do overwatered plants always seem to trick us into making the absolute worst diagnosis? Well, this is where the silent killer really uses our own instincts against us. What's fascinating and frustrating is that the symptoms perfectly mimic underfeeding. You're going to see leaves yellowing, growth just grinding to a halt, and the whole plant drooping sadly. These misleading symptoms prompt a lot of novice growers to mistakenly pour even more dark, heavy plant food into a pot that's already saturated. But remember that chain reaction we just talked about? The roots are suffocating. Adding more nutrients to an oxygen-deprived root zone rarely helps, and honestly, it usually makes things much, much worse.
Just look at the stark contrast between these two conditions. This is hands down one of the most confusing aspects for growers. Both the underwatered plant and the overwatered plant appear super wilted and totally unhappy on the surface, right? But the underlying botanical cause is night and day. An underwatered plant lacks water. Super simple. But an overwatered plant lacks oxygen. The visual symptom is identical, but the biological root cause, pun totally intended there, is the exact opposite. This is why getting the proper diagnosis is quite literally everything.
True root health is really all about this delicate, continuous balance of moisture and air. Think of a healthy soil profile like the ground outside right after a gentle, warm, light rain. The water is readily available for the plant to drink up, but crucial air spaces still remain open in the soil structure. The second that balance disappears and your soil becomes a muddy swamp, well, that's where all your problems begin.
Moving on to Section 3, the disease domino effect.
Because unfortunately, the problems don't just stop at suffocation. Beyond that, oxygen deprivation opens the door to these secondary silent threats. As oxygen drops, microscopic killers eagerly move in on your stressed roots. We are talking about absolutely devastating root pathogens like species of Pythium and Fusarium. These pathogens, they absolutely thrive in wet, anaerobic conditions. When your soil is constantly saturated and oxygen levels tank, you are basically rolling out the red carpet for these diseases to multiply like wildfire.
And this brilliantly illustrates the double-edged sword of overwatering. Healthy, oxygen-rich roots are actually surprisingly resilient, and they're naturally resistant to a lot of these pathogens. But stressed, suffocating roots, not so much. Overwatering strips away your plant's natural cellular defenses, indirectly ramping up the pressure from these devastating diseases. So you aren't just drowning the plant, you're essentially serving it up on a silver platter to root rot.
Okay, let's talk solutions in Section 4, Mastering Moisture Management.
So, how do we fix all this? How do we break the cycle and stop being passive water pourers and instead become active oxygen managers? Well, the solutions are actually surprisingly straightforward. One of the single best tools available to you is incredibly simple. Just lift your containers. Experienced growers rely heavily on judging their irrigation timing strictly by pot weight. When you freshly water a container, lift it up. Really note how heavy it feels in your hands. Then just wait and observe. Over the next few days, as the plants consume that water and the soil dries out, lift it again. Note that significantly lighter weight. This physical, hands-on technique is your absolute best defense against chronic overwatering. And hey, container size plays a massive role here too. You absolutely have to match your container size to your plant size to prevent these extended wet periods. A large container holds a massive amount of water. If you drop a tiny little plant into an oversized pot, those small roots just can't drink fast enough. The soil stays wet for way too long, and it creates the perfect storm for root stress and oxygen deprivation.
Also, notice how completely your environment dictates water usage. Temperature, humidity, airflow, these are huge factors. A plant sitting in a hot and dry environment is going to consume water rapidly. But take that exact same plant and move it into a cool and humid environment, its water consumption will be incredibly slow. Because of this massive variance, trying to stick to rigid irrigation schedules is incredibly dangerous for your garden.
There's a quote from our source material I absolutely love, and it always makes me smile because it hits the nail right on the head. Plants don't read calendars. It's so true. You have to stop watering on a strict schedule. Watering every Tuesday and Friday just because it happens to fit your personal routine is a total recipe for disaster. You really need to start responding to your plant's actual environmental needs. Observe your plants, observe that container weight, and observe your environment.
So if you take nothing else away from this, remember this crucial point. The very best growers aren't simply watering, they're actively managing oxygen. Growth fundamentally depends on root health. Root health depends on oxygen, and oxygen depends entirely on proper moisture balance. By optimizing root oxygen, you build healthier roots, which is the actual engine driving your plant's performance. You get this right, and I promise you, significantly larger yields are going to follow. Everything happening above the soil depends completely on what's happening below it.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. The next time your plants appear unhappy, droopy, or yellowing, are you going to blindly reach for the nutrient bottle, or are you going to stop, take a breath, and question your watering practices? Before you feed, remember the silent killer. Take a step back and investigate whether you might actually be stealing vital oxygen from your harvest. Keep those roots breathing, and your plants will definitely reward you. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep observing, and we will see you next time.